So in the summer of 2023, life in the Walter house changed changed dramatically. Not forever, but it changed dramatically. After years of coming up with every reason why we shouldn't, we decided to get a dog. Now, she is an energetic, loving, mostly well-behaved Shepsky named Maple. She is 50% German Shepherd and 50% Siberian Husky. She looks just like a shepherd. And maybe you've seen her laying on our patio table, just watching the neighborhood this winter. For some reason, she lays down on that table and just watches everything, keeping her eyes on everything. I was actually pretty excited to get a dog, as I loved having a shepherd when I was growing up. Maple is my walking buddy. We have a lot of fun together, and the kids love her, and the adults mostly love her. So, one thing that has become clear in the past year and a half is that when I call her name, she obeys most of the time. She will submit to others too because she's a pretty submissive dog, but she knows my voice and is more likely to respond to me even when she doesn't want to. When I call, she comes. I, of course, thoroughly enjoy that. It's fun when other people try to call her and she kind of maybe responds but mostly ignores, and then when I call her, she responds immediately and reluctantly comes to me. I must be the alpha, I don't know. We also have, on multiple occasions, had the privilege of watching Jordan and Sammy's dogs when they are out of town, and we're watching them right now. Treble and Oakley are much older Husky Lab mixes, and they are roughly 13 years old and a bit less energetic than my puppy, Maple. We have Treble and Oakley in our house. For many weeks, we've had them in our house over the last few years, and they've never really caused us any grief at all. Until last Sunday. Yes, I was taking a nap in the back of the house in the late afternoon, and Dina decided to take the kids and go to Walmart, and they were gonna get some stuff for some friends that were coming over, and she tethered Maple outside and left Oakley and Treble in the house to sleep. And after a while, I heard Maple yelping, and at that point, I was pretty sure what was going on. She had wrapped herself up in the bushes with the tether, and she was stuck because she loves to go and just get in the bushes and the tether. I go outside, and I realize when I go outside, I realize what is going on, and that is that the front door is open. And so, the sliding, not the sliding glass door, we have French doors over by our kitchen, and they are open. And so Maple has learned how to jump up and hit the handle of that door because it's a latch handle, it's not a knob. And she pushes in on the door, and the door opens up, and the other two dogs aren't tethered. So the other two dogs run out the door and go on a little adventure into the neighborhood. Now, keep in mind that this is about 25 minutes before the storm was going to hit. So I'm heading into the neighborhood, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on with these dogs and trying to find them, and I can't find them anywhere. And Treble and Oakley are just off on an adventure. And so about 10 minutes later, my wife comes home, and she jumps in the car, and we start going and looking all over the place for them. We can't find them. And in the meantime, the storm is rushing into Owosso, and Treble and Oakley are terrified of storms, mind you. You can't make this stuff up. We went all over the place looking for the dogs. We were checking the Owosso Pets page as they were posting about it, because if you've ever been on the Owosso Pet page, as soon as like a second that a dog gets loose, they are on it telling you where that dog is. And it's a little obnoxious, but it's very helpful. So we were able to, in that moment, know kind of where to look for them, but we couldn't figure it out. And all of the posts were like 25 minutes ago, so who knows how far the dogs have gone. And so we got this idea, well, let's go and let's see if they found their way back to Jordan and Sammy's house. And so we go over there, and as soon as we get into that neighborhood, the tornado sirens start going off. So we rush back home because one of us needs to be at the house with the kids in the storm, but I'm not really worried about the storm, I'm worried about the dogs. So I drop Dean off at home and I go look a bit more, and that's when the storm hits huge and it's whiteout rain conditions, and my kids are in the basement and I'm out in this storm. Actually, Cameron was storm chasing in his own car at this point. So yeah, we're quite a family. It's a lot of fun. So we find out that the dogs are at the corner of Hintz and Copus Road, and I go and I spend a couple minutes in the basement with the family, and then I head back out and I go down Hintz Road, I go down Copus Road, there's trees down, there's power lines down, I'm in the neighborhood just west of Kroger. I'm trying to find these dogs, I can't find them anywhere. I go back and I get Dina, and we head back down Hintz Road because we just think they're down there, and so I'm looking for them and I spot them. And they're out in the middle of a field, and it's just a muddy mess. So I drive into the field. There's this little inlet that I go into, and the mud takes me much farther into the field, and I'm stuck in the mud. I had to be pulled out. And we're yelling, "Trouble in Oakley, trouble in Oakley." And they're not really responding to my voice at all. And that's when Dina says, "Trouble, I have food." And Trouble came running for food. So that was easy to get Trouble with food. Oakley would not come. Oakley was terrified, was just running around in circles, really. And then Melody Sova showed up, and that was a blessing because Melody is Oakley's original owner. And she starts calling Oakley, and Oakley comes to her voice, and Oakley gets in her car, and Trouble in mine, and they're a mess. They're disgusting, and we're able to get them cleaned up, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, really long story short, sorry. Trouble and Oakley didn't respond to my voice, but they responded to the voice of their original owner, Melody. They knew her more. They didn't know us as well. And so real quick, to further illustrate this point today, I want you to watch this video. And before I show this video, I have to put a disclaimer on this video. Unfortunately, they have a moment where they say OMG a couple times, okay? And we know that that's not something that we are going to repeat, right? But we are going to hear that 3 times. And so I apologize for that. It's not me trying to offend anybody for that. So let's show this video.
One more time.
Oh, one is.
Louder!
Tika, 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 tika. Tika, 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 tika. Tika, tika.
Jig.
Tika, tika, tika.
Look at them, look at them.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
They are coming. Oh my God. Woo! Oh my God. I can't believe this. Oh my God. These two white boys. Oh my God. This is amazing. One more.
Yeah, Eunice made him go away.
Oh my God.
Was that cool or what?
Oh my God.
You will never have the same again.
Oh my God. I can't believe the way they were coming.
We are in a sermon series called I Am I. And each week we look at an I am statement found in Scripture and ask ourselves a question in response to that, to what God says he is, to who God says he is. And week one, God said, I am who I am. And we asked ourselves, do I trust the great I am? Week two, Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And we asked ourselves, are we hungry for the bread that sustains or the lesser bread of the world? And number three, last week, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And we asked ourselves if we are walking in darkness or in the light of Jesus. Now this week, Jesus is going to say, I am the door or the gate of the sheep. And before we jump into the scripture this morning, I want us to understand both the setting of the statement as well as help us to understand that this week and next week is really one combined conversation that happens with Jesus. And within this combined conversation, he is making one argument, but two different statements. And so the setting is very important for this, and we need to understand the setting. It's kind of fitting, if you want to put chapter 10, because it follows chapter 9, and put it in the same idea. And the beginning of chapter 10, you might be convinced that it needs to go with the story of the blind man getting his sight. Because the Pharisees rejected the blind man. They rejected his healing, and the man in turn rejected their leadership, but the man chose instead to follow Jesus because he had rejected their leadership. It's fitting and it fits nicely that Jesus goes on to talk about the differences between him being the good shepherd, which contrasts with the failure of the Pharisees who had been bad shepherds. So you could put those together, but I think it fits more nicely that chapter 10 is its own situation that happens a few months later. In chapter 9, Jesus comes out of that and he is saying, I am the light of the world. And then he heals the blind man. He says, I am the light of the world. And then he smears the mud on the blind man's eyes. So I believe that that happened in one setting, and this other section in chapter 10 happens in a different setting. I agree with the commentary that argues chapter 10 happened a few months later. And what's interesting about this is that when Jesus said, I am the bread of life, we discussed two weeks ago, that happened during Passover time. And then 6 months later at the Festival of Tabernacles, Jesus declared himself the light of the world. So we had a festival and a statement. 6 months later, a festival and a statement. And now a couple months later, Jesus makes another statement, and according to chapter 10, verse 22, they are at the Feast of Dedication, also known as Hanukkah. It is the only reference to this festival in the entire Bible. Hanukkah is not a festival that is commanded by God, but instead a festival born out of the Maccabean revolt. Israel had experienced very poor leadership much of their existence, right? We know that they had bad kings. We know that led them to exile. But during the 400 years of silence between the last words of the prophet Malachi and Jesus being born, they had more poor leadership. They had poor shepherding. And Judas Maccabeus led an army that recaptured the temple, and they rededicated the temple back to God because the leadership had done some awful and sinful things within the walls of that temple. And so it needed to be rededicated, and now it was rededicated to God. Hanukkah, or the Festival of Dedication, as it is referred to, is often celebrated for 8 days to remember the 8 miraculous days that Judas' supply of oil burned in the temple. It is during this festival of dedication that Jesus makes an example of the bad shepherding that Israel had had, and how he was a good shepherd, and how he was a different kind of shepherd. But sadly, we know that the bad leadership in Israel, it continued into the time of Jesus, as the leadership of the Pharisees had taught the people not about how to worship God and what is the appropriate way to approach God, but had taught them kind of like law enforcement officers, law enforcement for God's law, saying this is how you have to obey the law of God. And they were kind of lording that over the people. And Jesus is saying, I am different than that. I am different than that. So within the context that we just discussed, we'll read John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. It says this, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all that on his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus said again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus opens up talking about a shepherd and sheep and the sheep pen and the door and the gate and these thieves breaking in. And there's a lot that goes on in this first part of chapter 10. So I want us to understand the full metaphor that Jesus is going for. And then we will further explain the few aspects of what he was saying within the text. Shepherding may be somewhat unique and not really known to us, right? None of us in this room are probably shepherds, right? Is there a shepherd in the crowd this morning? Well, yes, Michael Shepherd and Bob Shepherd. Yes. You stole my joke. I was going to say it. But they're not shepherds by trade, and I don't think any of us are shepherds by trade. The people Jesus was speaking to, though, they would have known and they would have been well aware of shepherding practices. So he runs with this concept because it is familiar to them. Quoting from the NIV application commentary, in the desert at night, sheep were often herded into walled enclosures that either backed up against a cliff face or were at the end of a canyon. Such enclosures had waist-high stone walls topped with thorny branches. Such a pen was entirely for safety so that the sheep would not become prey to the wild animals. One small doorway opening in the wall served as the only entrance and exit. And the shepherd would either enclose that area with dry thorn bushes or would himself serve as sentry in the opening. He would stand in the doorway and would make sure that nothing came in and out. In other words, nothing could come in or out without the shepherd. The only way in was to climb over the wall, and the only one that would do that would have been a thief or a robber. Furthermore, the shepherds, they would work together in large groups with multiple herds, and the sheep would all go in, but the sheep, as shown by the video, know the voice of their shepherd. So after being protected all night, the various shepherds would call their sheep with their specific call, and their sheep would separate and follow their shepherd out the door. The shepherd didn't drive them either. That's how we do it a lot of times now. We drive them. But back in those times, and specifically in this time period, the shepherds would lead their sheep, and their sheep would follow them with the call. I am who I am. Jesus says, I am that God. And he is saying that the true sheep of Israel will follow his voice because he is the shepherd. A concept that we'll further examine next week, but we really can't ignore today because it's one conversation that is happening. So coming out of this statement, the Pharisees will press Jesus. And this is what we need to understand that happens directly after these two statements. The Pharisees will flat out ask Jesus, are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? And he will continue with his shepherd metaphor, reminding them that his sheep hears his voice and follow. And he will use that to basically tell the Pharisees, you're hearing my voice, but you're not following, so you are not my sheep. It's a pretty bold statement. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, but I want us to understand it because it's important. It's an important part of why Jesus says what he's about to say and what he says next week. Jesus often says something and then he kind of changes it up a little bit to give a new definition, like he does in the entire Sermon on the Mount, where he takes a bit of the law and he reinterprets it and tells them this is what was really meant by that. And so Jesus is going to run with this concept of the door. To begin with, Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. As the shepherd and as the door, because this is one conversation, the only way to the sheep was through the door. The only way to the sheep was through Jesus. He gives authority to enter into the sheep pen, but a thief will find a different way in. The only purpose for somebody to come in without the permission of the shepherd would be to steal the sheep, to hurt the sheep. But only sheep who don't know their shepherd and his voice will follow the sheep. Will follow the thief. We have to understand that. And they won't go back out through the door because the shepherd wouldn't allow it. And we know that Jesus is also the door itself. And the door protects what's in it and opens up to refreshment. The door opens up to the refreshment of the pasture. Like Psalm 23 said, we recited it this morning. Unless, like verse 10 says, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. At the same time, we also know that according to verse 5, the sheep will flee from a stranger, for they do not know the voice of a stranger. And so it's very confusing what Jesus is saying here, and it's very kind of what's going on, and they didn't quite understand, and we don't quite understand. And so Jesus further explains in verses 7 through 9, he says, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door to the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and he will go out to find pasture. I guess it comes down to whether or not you're hearing the call of your shepherd and following that call. Because throughout history, there's been false messiahs and there's been false teachers who've tried to lead people away from the truth of the word of God. There have been thieves who've tried to kill, steal, and destroy the message of the cross. And Jesus is indicating that the leadership that has failed Israel, they were the thieves. The bad leadership, the bad shepherding of Israel were they were the thieves that he is referring to. But he says the sheep did not listen to them. Now that causes a little bit of a problem in some ways, because if we read our Old Testament history, we know a lot of people did listen to the bad leadership. What Jesus is saying, though, is that the true sheep, the actual sheep that were in his flock, did not listen. And it reminds us of the Babylonian exile, where many people wouldn't turn back to God, but a couple did, and it's called the remnant. A few did. A few people did stay faithful to God, and they were the true sheep. Though Israel had been led by bad kings, men like Daniel stood strong and stood faithful. Men like Nehemiah and Ezra began to forge ahead with a new steadfastness towards God. The true sheep hear the voice of the shepherd even when the rest of the flock went astray. They stayed strong. They stayed faithful. Is that us? Is that us? Do we hear the voice of our shepherd calling? He says, I am the bread of life. Are you hungry for the bread that will sustain, or are you hungry for the bread of the world? He says, I am the light of the world. Are you walking in darkness or being guided by his light? He says, I am the gate or the door. Are you listening to his voice and following? Are you following the shepherd through the only door that there is that leads to pasture and Jesus is that door? Or are you being tricked by a thief who comes to kill, steal, and destroy? Only a sheep who doesn't know his shepherd's voice will be fooled. The idea of Jesus being the gate or door and the shepherd, they go hand in hand. It works together. He is the gate and the door, but only the sheep who hear his shepherd's call walk through that door. To illustrate this a little further, though, I want to go back to Genesis 22. Genesis 22, we've all heard this before many times. God had made a covenant with Abraham that his descendants would be as many as the sand on the seashore or the stars in the sky. After a very long time, Sarah finally conceived and Isaac was born. And when Isaac was likely a teenager, God told Abraham to sacrifice him on a very specific mountain. We talked about this in great detail last spring when we did our Mountaintop Experiences sermon series. And this account is an incredible part of our faith, as it serves as an example of God's substitutionary atonement and also foreshadows Jesus' death and resurrection on the same mountaintop 2,000 years later. After God provided the ram for Isaac and Abraham worshiped through the sacrifice, God reestablishes his covenant with Abraham. And listen to what he says when he's reestablishing that covenant in Genesis 22, 17 through 18. I will surely bless you. I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand in the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all nations of earth be blessed because you obeyed my voice. 2 words there, the gate of his enemies, and you obeyed my voice. Abraham obeyed God's voice, and because he obeyed God's voice, his family lineage brought about the Christ, the Messiah, the gate of the enemies. The words used for gate in both Genesis and in John are identical in definition. Jesus is the gate that keeps us safe from the enemy, but we have to hear and obey his voice to remain in the flock. Jesus says, I am the door of the sheep. Am I hearing his voice and staying safely with him, walking through the only door that leads to pasture, Jesus? Or am I trying to find a different way? Am I trying to be like a thief almost? Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy you. But Jesus wants to lead you to refreshment and eternal safety. The enemy tries to sneak in through a different way because he knows that the door is secure and impenetrable. He cannot beat Jesus. But if you don't listen to the voice of your shepherd, Jesus, you will be deceived. The enemy tries to trick us. He says things like, did God really say? Are you sure that's okay? Or that's wrong? Are you sure that's wrong? Come try this fruit over here, Satan says. It's just a little lie. It's no big deal, right? It's not really bad. Everyone's doing it. God doesn't care about that stuff anymore. That's Old Testament. This is the worst one right now. It's just a bad translation. Jesus never said no. That one is used quite often to excuse sin. Sometimes the thief is even trickier, teaching false gospels and using the word of God to say whatever will tickle the ears of the people that listen. But the sheep know the shepherd's voice and follow him and are not fooled. And the door will secure them safely within the flock. I was discussing this earlier this week with a group of ministers. I'm writing this sermon series with about 7 other ministers across the United States, and it's a lot of fun to get their feedback, and we kind of throw things out there and discuss them. And one of the things that we were talking about this week is that in every single week of this I am statement, Jesus is kind of declaring himself the only one. He is the bread that sustains, the other breads won't fulfill you. They won't. He is the light of the world, and without him there's nothing but darkness. He is the door. There's no other way except through him. He is the door. And I hope you are being the sheep. We're called to be listening to the voice of our shepherd, our good shepherd, and walking through his door. Because his door leads to pasture. His door leads to goodness. So ask yourself the question. Jesus says, I am the door. Are you with him? Are you hearing his voice? Are you following him to his pasture?